Hi everyone, good evening. We're going to discuss Parshas Beshalach. So, in the first paragraph of the Parsha, we learn that Hashem took the Jewish people out from Egypt to bring them to Israel via the long road. Okay, and the verse says, God did not lead them by way of the Philistines because it was near. For God said, perhaps the people will reconsider when they see a war, and they will return to Egypt. So there's a few points to bring out from this. God brought the Jewish people out of Egypt, which represents a state of exile, to bring them to Eretz Yisrael, which represents a state of redemption. We know that it took 40 years for the Jewish people to ultimately arrive and settle in Eretz Yisrael. But even when they did arrive and settle in Eretz Yisrael, and even when they built the first and second Beis Hamikdash, the redemption wasn't complete. Because they had settled in Israel, and because they had built the first and second temple, the state of consciousness in man, the level had been lifted and set a new bar. But the evil inclination was never completely removed, right? The Satan was not removed, and that only comes with the third temple. The process of going from exile to redemption isn't complete merely because the decision to leave exile was made. The decision is the initial spark that prompts the journey of refinement so that redemption can be had. Okay, just like when the Jews left Egypt, that decision, right, was the spark that they had said enough was enough, and God had given them the opportunity to choose to leave. And the ones that were ready to leave and were still connected to God, like we discussed before, were the ones that were able to physically leave Egypt and start the process. The decision is the initial spark. Okay, so a spiritual closest to God. That is, so when we talk about redemption, what does redemption mean? It's a spiritual closest to God that is akin to freedom. Okay, a freedom of materialism and perception of duality. It's a foreign kind of existence. This redemption. It's a foreign kind of right, because we've never lived in a state where there was no within the human psyche a evil inclination to deal with. So it's brand new to us, right? And that's why achieving it is so difficult because it's an unclear destination. We've never been there before. We don't know what it looks like. We don't know what it feels like. We don't know how we would act in that kind of setting where we only perceive oneness. For example, when the spies went to scout the land of Israel later in the Torah, they arrived and saw a land that was beyond their limited understanding of what's possible, because they never witnessed or experienced living or dwelling in a land like that before. They only lived in Egypt and they were sojourning through the desert, right? So when the spies got to Israel and they saw the land and the bountiful, vegetation and the luscious greenery, they didn't. It was beyond their ability to appreciate, and they hadn't developed the capacity for that type of goodness. So what they were left to do was try to minimize it because their vessels weren't ready for that kind of for you know to for that kind of blessing and that kind of physical existence. It was so novel that although the blessings were obvious, they weren't ready, and ultimately brought back a report limited by fear and a sense of inadequacy. But that was the ultimate destination, and the Jewish people had to dwell in the desert so they could transform into a nation worthy to live in the setting, right? And so that's the microcosm, and now, right, we're applying this to the macrocosm, that you know the human history up leading up until now has been kind of like a spiritual desert where our ability to appreciate oneness and divinity um, has been, there's been a ceiling on it. But God willing, as we get closer, that ceiling gets raised and then removed. So why does the Torah teach us that God brought the Jewish people to brought the Jewish people the long way, and not by way of the Philistines, lest they see war and decide to return to Egypt? The Jewish people were in their initial stages of redemption. The decision to leave Egypt, exile, or servitude was still fresh. They were being chased by the Egyptians, and God, they were being chased by the Egyptians. And God is teaching that having to have dealt with a war too would have placed the Jewish people in a position where they would have the opportunity to choose whether to continue on or to choose a perceived self preservation and give up by returning to the exile. So God turned the people toward the way of the wilderness to the Sea of Reeds. So God wanted, amongst other things, and in his infinite wisdom, to make a sign, a showing of his ability, his strength, his providence over all facets of creation. His help to the Jewish people, those having chosen to leave exile, that they would not be alone, that they were to only walk forward with trust and dedication, and his willingness to destroy exile mindset by performing the great miracle that would be the splitting of the sea. Our personal and collective process of redemption has started. If we trust that God will lead us, we can understand that our personal and collective path is the one of least resistance, that we are to only keep walking forward with trust and dedication to arriving at our destination, which is, ultimately redemption. That's what we are. This is what our generation is doing. We're pushing, we're pushing the ball forward. From there, from these verses, we can expect that God will act in ways that show us He is active in our personal and collective journey. Big miracles, right? B'ezrat Hashem and Baruch Hashem, thank God, that we are not doing it alone, but with His guidance and supervision, so that we, personally and collectively, crack and replace the exile mindset with the sense of freedom that comes with perceiving, experiencing, and living with the true oneness. Right? That's the redemption. Right? So that's what we're doing, and that's what these first few verses of Parshas Beshalach are teaching us. That just like God, you know, knew that having brought them along a way that would have tested their resolve, he took them out of there and put them and brought them down a different path to specifically show them that he wasn't just with them in Egypt, but he was going to be, that he always intended to be with them along the path throughout the entire journey. Thank you very much.